Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Today, we're going to go over the spine, and we'll start with a anatomy review of the spine, and then we'll also go over some applied kinesiology here for the spine as well. You'll also notice that we'll get a little sidetracked and go over the neck, as you'll see here that the neck is part of the spine. So therefore, I felt it was relevant and important to go over that region as well. So let's go ahead and get started here with the neck, or I'm sorry, the spine. So here we go. What we're looking at here are all of the vertebrae of the spine. So the vertebrae are those tiny individual bones that make up our spine. And we have 5 different regions that we'll go over here. So the first region and the most superior, or at the top, is the cervical region. And you'll notice that there's 7 individual bones here in the cervical region, okay? So cervical region is equivalent to what we call our neck. The cervical region is the neck. We have 7 vertebrae in this area. You also notice that the first 2 vertebrae, C1 and C2, each have unique names as they have very unique shapes as well. So the C1, the very first and most superior vertebrae, is the atlas, and the one immediately inferior to it is the axis. And then from there, we just name them C3, C4, C5, etc. All right, and again, 7 cervical vertebrae in this region. Next, we have the thoracic vertebrae. All right, so these are the ones here in that light orange. We have 12 thoracic vertebrae in this region. Reason being is that we also have 12 pairs of ribs. And so all of our ribs attached to our spine in the back, attached to these vertebrae, and can come up and across towards our chest and our sternum. All right, so that's what's really important and relevant for the thoracic region. And you can even see here in this picture, we have that silhouette of the thoracic region. You can see each rib going towards their vertebrae, okay? Next here, we have the lumbar region, all right? So lumbar region is synonymous with our low back region, all right? And you can see here that we have 5 lumbar vertebrae. And you'll notice here, these more larger portions in each of these vertebrae that I'm hovering my laser pointer over, they're getting bigger and bigger as we go down. So you can see the lumbar vertebrae are the largest so far, and therefore we bear the most weight in this region. Most of our body weight is transferred and is carried through this region. All right, and again, we have 5 lumbar vertebrae here. Lastly, we have the sacral region. So you can see here, sacrum, it only says S1, but there's really 5 vertebrae in there. But what's different is that you can see here between the rest of the vertebrae, there's spaces in between, and those little gray spaces in between are our intervertebral discs. And so that's what helps kind of provide some cushion, and so that way we don't have bone-on-bone contact. But what's different in the sacral and the coccygeal region is that these bones are all fused together. So it's a series, in the sacral region, it's a series of 5 bones fused together, and in the coccygeal region, or the coccyx region, there are 4 bones fused together. And you can see here, this is where our low back and everything begins to articulate with those innominate bones that we talked about previously, or our hip bones. All right. And again, this is an area that we're going to talk about here. This is where our SI, or our sacroiliac joint, is, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then you can see here where I'm hovering my cursor over here, all these articulation between each vertebrae are actual little joints that we're going to talk about as well. So this is an example of what a thoracic vertebrae looks like. And most of the vertebrae are very similar to this, but some of their characteristics change as you go from top to bottom. Like I said before, as you go from superior to inferior, or top to bottom, the bodies of these vertebrae, these big flat portions here, those are getting bigger and bigger because we end up bearing more weight and transmitting more forces in that area, all right? The parts of your vertebrae that we most easily feel on our own selves, if you ever touch your back and you feel those bony bumps there, those are what's going to be your spinous processes, and that's what's projecting directly posterior off of your spine. So if we go back to the previous picture, all of these pointy edges coming off here, those are our spinous processes, all right? Next, we have our transverse processes. So think of transverse like the transverse plane, we go off to the sides. So these here, what I'm hovering my laser pointer over here now, those are the transverse processes of the thoracic vertebrae. And again, they typically get larger and larger as we go down. Now, the next part here that's going to help make up the joints in between each pair of vertebrae are the superior and inferior articulating facets. So you can see here, right, where I'm hovering my cursor over here, is the superior articulating facet, this blue area, and then the inferior articulating facet is right here. All right, so again, I'm gonna go back to this slide. So, you know, forms the joints between each of these vertebrae. I'm gonna move ahead here for a second. So this here, so where I'm hovering my cursor over right now is the superior articulating facet of this vertebrae here. So this is the superior articulating facet, and that facet is articulating with the inferior articulating facet of the vertebrae directly above it. Okay. Give me 1 second here. I'm trying to move myself out of the way, but it's getting a little laggy. There we go. Let me move myself out of the way here. So we can see here, this is my superior articulating facet of this vertebrae, and then it's articulating with the inferior articulating facet directly above it. So this here, that articulation is what we call a facet joint, all right? And so there's 2 of these with each pair of vertebrae. So we're only able to see half of it because it's, you know, because we're getting a side view. But as you can see here, if I go back, right? So if I have, this is the superior articulating facet, so you can see you have 1 on each side, and therefore we have, a pair of inferior articulating facets to go with it. All right, so we have 2 of these facet joints with each pair of vertebrae, all right? And so of course, with each pair of vertebrae, there's not a whole ton of motion going on, right? But when we combine the motion of all of these facet joints together throughout the entire length of the spine, if we just took the articulation between T1 and T2, you're not going to move all too much. But if we did, T1 through T12, we're going to get a lot more movement because we're taking all the little individual movements between each pair and we combine it all into one, then we get a lot more movement out of that, okay? And again, so let's go over here, the sacroiliac joint quickly here. So again, this is where our spine articulates with our innominate or pelvis bones or hip bones, whatever you like to call them. So you can see here that our sacrum sits right in between in the posterior aspect of our innominate bones. And so the sacrum is sitting right in the posterior aspects of our iliums, and that articulation between the iliums and the sacrum, as we call it, sacroiliac joint. Sacrum meaning sacrum, iliac meaning, the ilium. It's that articulation that's forming our SI joint. Okay, so let's go ahead and get some movements going here. So movements of the spine. So we have flexion and extension, which is going to be us bending forwards and backwards, right? So especially at the top there, I arch my back backwards or posteriorly a bit. That's what we're going to look at in extension. And then flexion is whenever I'm bending down to forward and reach my toes. You can see how my spine is rounding forward in order to reach forward, okay? So next we have lateral flexion here, where I'm bending side to side like that. And then lastly, we have rotation, which is synonymous to any kind of I'm not sure why I can't get this play. There we go. So, and this is going to be a rotation where we're able to twist side to side like that. Okay. All right. So now we're going to look at the neck. The movements are all the same, but I just want to show you from the next perspective what things look like. So this is first one here is going to be flexion and extension. So again, when I bring my head up and I'm looking towards the ceiling, that's extension. When I'm bringing my chin down towards my chest, that's going to be flexion. When I'm rotating my head side to side like this, that's going to be rotation of the neck. And then when I'm tilting my head side to side, like I'm almost trying to get my ears to my shoulders, that's going to be lateral flexion. All right, and notice when I'm doing that too, my shoulders aren't moving at all, it's just my neck. A lot of people try and compensate by bringing their shoulder up to the ear like that, but it's just how your neck is moving, nothing else. All right, so some biomechanical faults are things we want to kind of keep out here for just with regular posture and even during exercise as well. So the first one here is lordosis. So lordosis means an excessive curvature in the lumbar spine. So you can see here in a normal person, there's a slightly concave curve in the lumbar spine, all right? And here with someone lordosis, that concave curve is taken to the extreme, so to speak. It's an excessive concave curvature in the lumbar spine. It's an excessive lordotic curve in the lumbar spine. We can also see cervical lordosis, where especially people who have that forward head, rounded shoulder posture, their heads are always jutting forward, that creates an excessive lordotic curvature in the neck as well. So both the cervical spine and the lumbar spine, as you can see here, both naturally have a slightly concave curve. All right, but when we have an excessive curvature in those regions, it's called lordosis. All right. And you'll see, naturally speaking, too, in the thoracic region, we have a slightly convex cave where it's coming outwards. All right, so that's going to be a key point here. All right, so we just went over lordosis. We're looking at the right side picture here now. So with kyphosis, we can have an excessive convex curvature. All right, so our upper back is rounded forward. This is people who work on a computer a lot are always looking forward. Anyone who sits at a desk, or if we're on our phones too much, watching TV, we tend to put ourselves in these postures of our upper backs rounding like that. And then lastly here is scoliosis. So scoliosis is what we call lateral curvature in the spine. So it's deviated off to one side or the other. So you can see here that the spine starts to go one way, but then it deviates and autocorrects almost and goes in a different direction. So naturally, right, we want our spine to be nice and straight and all of our vertebrae to be stacked directly on top of one another. But in scoliosis, that's not the case, where they're almost like in a zigzag pattern, almost going upwards. All right, so let's go over some of the musculature here in the spine. So the biggest muscle groups here in the spine that are truly acting on the spine here. There's a lot of other muscles here that technically aren't acting directly on the spine, and we're just going to go over the ones directly acting on the spine. So the erector spinae group are the muscles that are going to act directly on the spine and be responsible for help us doing particularly extension in these instances. And they are going to help us a little bit with rotation and whatnot, but primarily with extension here, these are the ones I'm going to talk about first, are the erector spinae. And in this muscle group, we have three different muscles, right? I apologize, I accidentally put quadratus lumborum under erector spinae, but the quadratus lumborum is not in that group, all right? But I'll clarify that here in a second. So if you look here, I also have this radius anterior muscle circled as well. I apologize. I should have this erector spinae muscle circled. I apologize about that. But if you look here at the erector spinae, we have almost like three different parallel lines of muscle here, all right? So, and we've removed a lot of muscles here. You can see on the left side, this is what your body would look like normally if we took away all the skin and we were looking at your muscles. On this right side here, we took away these muscles in order to see the muscles that are deeper to this. So these three muscles here, going from lateral to medial, we have the iliocostalis, the longissimus, and the spinalis. All right, so again, these are going from medial to lateral. All right. We're going from medial to lateral. And again, it's iliocostalis, longissimus, and spinalis, and together these are the erector spinae. Even deeper, we still have to remove some layers in order to see the quadratus lumborum, but the quadratus lumborum goes from our last few ribs here in the spine to our hips, okay? So this guy helps us primarily with lateral flexion, bending side to side, all right? That's his primary role. And again, this is a very deep muscle. As you can see, we've removed a lot of muscles to see this layer. Anteriorly, this is where our abdominal muscles come into play. All right, so the four abdominal muscles we have are the rectus abdominis. The rectus abdominis is what we know primarily as like our six-pack muscles. You can see right here where my cursor is over. And then also, more superficially, we have the external obliques. All right, and you can pay attention here to the direction of the way the fibers are running. So you almost look like these fibers would be going in the same direction as if you're putting your hands into your front pockets, okay? Whereas if you look at the internal obliques are immediately deep to the external obliques. So you can see the external obliques are going in one direction and the internal obliques are running in the direct opposite direction. So imagine you're angling your hands to go backwards into your back pocket of your pants. That's the direction those fibers are going, okay? And then lastly, deep to that is the transverse abdominis, which runs horizontally and helps us brace our core and our abdominal cavity, especially when we're doing any sort of heavy lifting, anything like that, when we have to brace our spine. key thing about the internal and external obliques, so they both help us with lateral flexion and rotation. With lateral flexion, you know, if you're working on your right external oblique, it's going to help us laterally flex to that same side. But with the external obliques, if you want to rotate to the left, you end up using your right external oblique and your left internal oblique. All right, so I'll say that again. If you're rotating to the left, so I'm twisting to the left, I end up using my right external oblique and my left internal oblique. If I want to twist to the right, I'm going to use my left external oblique and my right internal oblique. All right, so the direction in which you're moving, you know, if I'm moving to the left, I'm using the opposite side external oblique and the same side internal oblique. All right, and that's because of the way of these, the direction of which these fibers are oriented. That's what causes that, using the opposite side. All right, so let's go over some exercises here. Again, let me move my video out of the way here. So we're going to look at Superman / Aquaman. In the video here, I'm doing Superman just so that way it's easier to see my spine and my body. If I was doing Aquaman, the arms would be directly by my side. All right, so let's go ahead and look at Aquaman, Superman. There you go. All right, so when I'm coming up and I'm bringing my chest up off the floor, you can see how my spine is going up into extension. All right, and then when I come back down, I'm going back into a neutral position. But I have to go through some sort of flexion in order to get there, right? So I'm going from extension to flexion. So I bring my chest down to the ground, and when I bring my chest up off the floor, I'm going into extension. And now I'm going to do crunches here. So you can see here, crunches when I bring my upper back off the ground, my whole spine is flexing forward. And so I'm using my rectus abdominis and the rest of my abdominal musculature in order to flex my spine up, okay? So again, like with Superman, Aquaman, I'm doing extension of my back. With crunches, I'm doing more flexion of my back. All right, and there's a lot when now we're going into like more rotational and side bending. There's a lot of different exercises and examples that you can talk about. I think a baseball swing or a golf swing is a really good example of looking at the rotation. So you can see in this picture here how he's rotating to the right, and as he's swinging through, he's coming back and finishing through on his left side. So you can see all of that rotation in this guy's back. And, you know, just a significant amount of rotation you need. Same idea really with the baseball swing too, if you can imagine that as well. And then side bending, you know, people do side bending exercises in the gym, even doing some form of like a toe touch. If you're in that crunch position, you're trying to go side to side, touching your heels. Anytime where you're doing that lateral flexion, that's when you're gonna use your obliques and perform some form of side bending. All right. All right, guys. Well, hey, that is all for the spine. I hope you guys found this useful and were able to take something valuable away from this. Keep checking back for more of our videos so that we can continue to help you out the best we can. All right, thanks.